The question we keep asking is who will provide the leadership for the next 20 or 30 years from now, when this generation who have known such war and such turmoil should be moving into leadership positions? Where will that leadership come from? Malingwishi was one of our very favorite places to visit. The Methodist missionaries of 100 years ago found the most beautiful parts of Africa, but they never thought about how people were going to get there. And so the roads, which have almost disappeared in many parts of Africa, are only manageable with heavy-duty four-wheel trucks, or what sometimes are necessary to find some of these centers. But there's a seminary in Malingwishi dedicated to training pastors who are going into the rural villages. They accept 4 of every 90 applicants for each year's first beginning session, because they bring the wife and family with them. And yes, we now have the first woman who brought her spouse with her to the seminary. There is a 3-year training program for the men in theology and group leadership, and a 3-year training program for the women. Because if they go back into these villages, they will probably be the most educated women in the village. And their responsibilities will be to train others. So they take courses in child care, in nutrition, in gardening, in growing plants in a sustainable way. And they will become leaders in their villages. Well, they have a cell tower on that campus, and they were very proud to point out that they earned $50 a month with that cell tower there. I did not tell them that we were offered one on the Keck campus for $1,000 a month, that we couldn't done, but I didn't want to get into that. And it was interesting because the person who was leading this seminary was already thinking beyond where anybody else in the Congo was thinking. And he then discovered that they would be able to connect to the satellite and to the internet using the cell tower in that country. In Africa, there are no longer telephone services. And you know why? Because you need copper wires for that, and you can cut down the copper wires and make jewelry to sell to the Americans who come to visit. And so no sooner as the copper wire gets strung than it gets taken down. So they've just eliminated the whole telephone system, and everybody carries 2 or 3 cell phones. And they've got a system worked out where you buy a SIM card as you go from one country to another, and they are so far ahead of where so many other of the Western countries are for that particular reason. So they announced very proudly that they had 20 computers in their computer center, 10 of which were hooked up to the internet. And Martin wanted to see the service room that they had, and so we went into the service room, and there on the table next to the server were 6 car batteries all hooked up to the server. And Martin had a rather negative response, and so I assume that's not good. Is that right, Martin? That's not good at all. And they said, but it works. The electricity goes out 2 or 3 times a day, the car batteries kick in, and we stay up on the internet. So, you know, these people are going to make it well into the 21st century. There's no doubt about that. But it is a problem that we need to help them resolve. Uganda. 3 hours out of the capital, we traveled one Sunday to visit a small community with a strong sense of identity and responsibility. Here, the local church had been taking in orphans that they found in the wild, as they call it, and integrating them into the community as one large family. And it's interesting to note that the children were not the adopted children. The families were the adopted families. And it just reversed that relationship. And they were putting those young people through school on Sunday in church, which was about a 3-hour opportunity. It was budget Sunday. Wouldn't you know, I'd end up at budget time in this church. So we were sitting there listening to the translations of the discussion with my mind wandering slightly, when the head of the women's division stood and explained their budget needs. Then she said, but they had longer-term plans that the church needed to deal with, because the church must meet a current need, and that was a cyber cafe for the young boys and men, so they would have both a learning opportunity and an opportunity for entertainment. and they would not get into so much trouble. Well, Cyber Cafe came out in English, and I must say I responded. After the service, the women asked me to visit their place. Now, the church was a thatched roof with poles on the side, so air could move through it. The women's house, however, was a cement block house of 2 large rooms. And in the first room that we went into, there were 6 or 7 old Singer sewing machines. Some of you aren't old enough to know, but you used to have to tread the old Singer sewing machines, that's right. And here they were, because these women had taken on the responsibility to teach all the women of the village how to sew. And they now had found an outlet in the capital where they were able to take their work. But just in case they had more than they could manage, over in another corner was the table, and all the beads were on the table. Because, as I was told, they think the beads are really African, and so they wanted to have those available as well to sell. But they all waited for me, and there were now about 30 of us moving from room to room into the next room. And the next room was empty except for a table in the middle of the room with a very large box and a covering over the box. And we stood there until everybody was in place. The drama of it all is important, of course. And everybody was in place, and the sheet was removed, and it was a Dell computer. Now, there was no electricity, and there was no water yet, but they had the first Dell computer for their computer, the Cyber Cafe. And I expect in 2 years when we go back, that Cyber Cafe is going to be up and working, and they're going to have the opportunity to do that. And in Rwanda, as I said, they have just observed the 10th anniversary of the genocide in which 800,000 people were killed. And we watched teams of people, 2 men and 2 women, laying fiber optic cable throughout the city with a grid that they showed us that would take it out to the villages, waiting for that cable to come up to hook up. What do we find? We find people willing to seek a different and better way of life than they may have ever known, willing to see the need and role of education with a concern for a new type of leadership, perhaps without corruption, or as they would say, maybe with even less corruption. We see a community where people can work together and give identity to the community while finding new identity in who they are, solving their own problems, but also being aware of how to make life better. Not necessarily easier, but better, but with more opportunities than they currently have. And as one person described their wishes as we talked about this, he said, "We want to be part of the 21st century, not left over from the 19th century," and feeling about the colonial period had allowed them to fall very far behind. We found some very sophisticated government offices, staffed by people with advanced degrees and experience from other parts of the world. And we found others where little thought was being given to the future, much less to the present. We hope to have no trouble whatsoever in Sierra Leone getting our license, because we sat down with the new technology committee and gave them an outline of what they were supposed to be doing in their new responsibilities and where they could find information about how to do those things. We found service providers. The Lebanese are all over West Africa. The Lebanese are the businessmen of the Middle East, and they've moved to Africa as well. Service providers who acted like Microsoft employees, men and women working together, often with the women having had advanced work in other countries, but choosing to come back to Africa to make a difference. At noon, they bring in a basket of sandwiches and soft drinks, and they have a meeting over lunch around that big table, focusing on jumping almost 25 years of technological development in the West to step into today and to think about the future. Many of these folks who have returned to Africa are bringing back new ideas, new ways of doing things, and breaking out of some of the national and tribal stereotypical thinking, seeing the world as the place in which they want to live and work, and in which they are able to make a unique contribution.